In this video, we are going to discuss the most effective training delivery methods out there, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each. The key question to ask yourself is, how will you reach your audience? Now, before we go into this incredible table that's actually was developed by the ASTD, a handbook, right, for workplace training, I'd like to draw your attention to the kinds of thinking skills that we have and how we can reflect and think about our own training, the needs of our trainees, and what delivery method would best suit them. The key thing to think about is low order versus higher order thinking skills, from remembering to creating, okay? So remembering can just literally be remembering your ABCs, whereas creating is creating your own alphabet, okay? And so in between the creating and the remembering is a whole bunch of different levels of thinking. And we engage these levels of thinking in the way that we teach and in the way that our training programs are actually designed. So, when we're thinking about remembering, we're also thinking about the next level, which is understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So let me walk you through. Remembering, as I mentioned, a child would be able to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? The alphabet. Understanding would be to be able to put those words into some kind of sequence so they could just understand that that word is bed and that word is chair. Applying it is thinking about, I sit on a bed, I sit on a chair, and I sleep on a bed. In other words, they're applying the words, they understand the meaning, and they're remembering the letters, okay? Analyzing is slightly more complex, all right? So you can ask the child then, okay, if you sleep on the bed and you sit on the chair, what is the most comfortable way to eat compared to relax? Okay, and the child would then have to analyze this information and think about the word relax. What does the word relax mean? What would be, I could sit in a chair, that could be relaxing, but it might be more relaxing to sleep on a bed, right? They're analyzing. Evaluating is one step further, okay, where you're asking the child to evaluate different similar situations and to discern the nuances between those situations. So, for example, you could ask a child to evaluate how comfortable a bed is compared to how comfortable a chair is. And they have to think about the evaluation of a comfortable to then decide. And then creating is ultimately thinking about another word for bed, another way of thinking about bed. Maybe I sit on my bed, so it's actually my chair, right? So that's creating a new way. And so those are different levels of thinking. Now, what we need to think about is, how do we want to engage our participants, right? So we have in-person learning, e-learning, problem-based learning, blended learning, and non-formal learning. When we're thinking about in-person, we can often think about our traditional ways of teaching and learning, right? Many of us are familiar with this. And this is effective when we have large groups, and the disadvantages of this is that it's a very tell-me kind of mindset. Paulo Freire would call this the banking mindset. In other words, you deposit knowledge into the person. We have e-learning as a delivery method, which is computer-based. It provides training accessibility, but what it lacks is obviously that personal contact. You're watching this video right now. I'm not in the same room with you. And we could in fact learn more in a conversation than we probably could from you just listening to this video, okay? So the next level is actually problem-based learning. And what that does is, instead of giving solutions, it actually poses problems. So it will say to the participant, how do we solve this problem, as opposed to providing the solution to the problem. Okay, so it draws on the participant. But the challenge with that is that often you can lose focus. In other words, people become so fixated on their own ideas related to the problem that you actually lose the structure of the lesson, okay? Sometimes we can use blended-based learning, so the learning that sort of figures out how to blend in-person and e-learning. And what that does is it helps us think about the situation. I'm a big fan of blended learning, but it may be difficult for some learners to follow. For example, Learners who are very shy may be very adept to e-learning and not very adept to in-person. And so they may struggle in one context and not in the other. And especially if the lesson is mixed, that could really cause issues. And then you have non-formal learning, which is mostly closely associated with skills or certificate programs, where it's a very, very structured environment, very, very clear learning outcomes. Um, but this can often be in a professional development environment, right? And so the disadvantages of this is that it can often take place outside of a structure, if it's unstructured, right? If it's informal learning, and may not be recognized. In other words, someone may know how to code because they've taught themselves, but they don't actually have a certificate to show that. And so in each of these situations, you have to think about your context and what would be the best method of teaching.